Welcome to Back to the 80s, the series where I take you through the best films from the greatest decade. The whole thing started last summer. I had designed some custom wrapping paper for birthday presents, and then after that moved on to doodling the days of the week. Does that look incomplete to you? I've been drawing and coloring since I was a kid. Here we have Sesame Street, Ninja Turtles, Willow, and your guess is as good as mine. I find I'm most productive when I have some basic parameters and guidelines in place to make sure that I stay focused. So after those two projects, I committed to drawing the best films from the 1980s with one sheet of paper for each year. And in the process, I'm hoping to discover my favorite movie from each of the years, which will henceforth be known as Elliotts Pick. And the winning film from each year will get immortalized onto a blank tie. Seriously, these things are like $3 on Amazon. I don't know why I'm the only one doing this. To establish the mood for 1980, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about world history. The Rubik's Cube was invented. I greatly admire this puzzle, although I haven't yet figured out how it works. 1980 was the first appearance of Pac-Man. I love this game, although as a kid it always gave me anxiety, and to be honest, still gives me anxiety to this day. Howard Stern first hit the airwaves. I didn't really become a Howard Stern fan until years later when I saw Private Parts. WNBC! Allegedly, if you want a great movie made about your life story, just take it to Ivan Reitman. There was also a presidential election between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. At the time, the country was very divided and polarized, and both sides were really fired up and mad at one another. It's hard to imagine things getting any more tense. There was also the launch of CNN, which we're all very thankful for today. It's okay. Be mad at America. She could take it. But if you try and cancel Neil Diamond, we got a fucking problem. Speaking of America, 1980 also brought us the Winter Olympics and the Miracle on Ice. This was where Kurt Russell led Pete Duffy and a group of Midwesterners to defeat the Russians. Disney actually made a documentary about it. You should check it out. It's pretty good. On the stock market, Steve Jobs went public with Apple, which, thank God, because my entire career has been based on his work. Magnum P.I. was released. I've never actually seen it, but am very thankful for it because it took Tom Selleck away from Raiders of the Lost Ark and opened that role up for Harrison Ford. The Who Shot JR episode from Dallas came out. I've never seen it, never seen Dallas. The only thing I know about it is the Simpsons parody, Who Shot Mr. Burns, which is a masterpiece. I often prefer Simpsons to whatever they're doing a parody of. This should tell you everything you need to know about this series moving forward. In sad news, Mark Chapman took out John Lennon, which would be even more tragic if Yoko Ono hadn't already accomplished the task. In music news, we got new offerings from AC/DC, The Police, The Boss, Queen, Lip Sync, Pink Floyd, The Talking Heads, and a soundtrack for some entity known as The Jazz Singer. But the biggest news of 1980 is that my older brother Adam was born, and he brought to the world a number of great things, but chief among them is the praying mantis routine. And dance floors at weddings, bar mitzvahs, and funerals have never been the same. Before we dive into the movies, I think I should first provide a little bit of context. In 1980, I was just a gleam in my father's eye. For the record, this is my own personal list about how these movies impacted me when I was a kid and how they continue to impact me to this day. So if you have complaints or grievances along the way, feel free to make your own damn list. So last September, I cut out a tile of blank white paper, pinned it to the back of my door, and started to doodle my favorite films from 1980. Here we have the Millennium Falcon from The Empire Strikes Back. Probably the most legendary spaceship in all of science fiction. I've never actually drawn it before because it's a pretty complicated design. Growing up, my brother and I had the toy, the model that you could open up and put the little figures inside, so I never really felt the need to doodle it until now. This is the very iconic airplane poster design from the Zucker brothers. If you told me Shirley Airplane is the funniest movie of 1980, I would say, I agree with you. And then I would say, don't call me Shirley. Here we have John Carpenter's The Fog. Great soundtrack, great mood, great setting. I love the ghouls within the fog. Although if I'm gonna sit down and watch a John Carpenter horror movie, it's gonna be Halloween. John Carpenter is a pioneer in many ways, but for me, he showed that it was possible to write and direct and compose all by yourself. So thank you, John Carpenter, for leading the charge. Here we have Raging Bull from Martin Scorsese, hence the black and white. I admire this movie, although I don't really love it. It's far too serious and dramatic and sad for me. I much prefer fun and goofy and playful and silly and happy. So this one is just kind of a downer for me. Legendary cinematography, legendary performances, one of the best body transformations by an actor of all time. But if I'm watching something from Scorsese and De Niro and Joe Pesci, it's gonna be Goodfellas. Down here is the Gopher from Caddyshack, one of many classics from Harold Ramis and company. I don't really like golf, so I never quite got into this one. And if I am gonna watch a golf movie, it's gonna be, well, moron, good for Happy Gilmore, my God. Caddyshack is obviously very funny, but during the 80s, there were just so many comedies from the alumni from SNL that it's hard to keep up with them all. And for me, Caddyshack just sort of gets lost in the mix. This is the poster from Mad Max, a very famous independent film from Australia. Sort of like golf, I'm not very much into cars, so I didn't really get into this franchise until recently when I saw Mad Max Fury Road, which is probably the most bombastic, ballistic action movie you'll ever see. For me, Mad Max was always hard to get into, although I admire it again as an independent film, and for most importantly, bringing Mel Gibson to the table. So George Miller, thank you for that. Legend has it Mel Gibson wasn't intending to act at that point and was just driving his buddy to the audition, and the producer spotted him and asked him to perform, and he ended up getting the role. Here we have Ming the Merciless from Flash Gordon, played to perfection by Max von Sydow. I do believe he'll be making an appearance in one of Elliot's picks in the 80s, but not this year. This movie is a little too cheesy and campy even for my liking, which is saying a lot. Flash Gordon is a reboot of sorts from an old Saturday matinee serial from the 30s, which was a loose inspiration for both Indiana Jones and Star Wars for George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, who grew up on these stories. So it's pretty interesting to see Flash Gordon and Empire Strikes Back both influenced by the same source material, and to see how different they turned out. This is one of many movies where the soundtrack saves the day. That's typically the case when it's done by Queen. Here's Jack with the axe from The Shining, a classic from both Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick. Maybe the scariest movie of all time, although don't ask me to explain it. No TV and no beer make Homer something something. I'm oftentimes frustrated by Stanley Kubrick movies. They leave me feeling confused and disoriented and, quite frankly, stupid. They're way too complicated, way too abstract, and most importantly, way too fucking long. I fell asleep 3 times trying to get to the end of Barry Lyndon, and that was just the trailer. But of all of Kubrick's work, The Shining is probably my favorite because it's just so visceral. You don't really have to understand it to be scared by it. In fact, I think that's part of its charm. Terry Gilliam summed it up best when he said that Steven Spielberg movies give you answers. They make you feel comfortable. They make you feel smart. Stanley Kubrick films, however, are meant to challenge you and meant to spark discussion. Camp Crystal Lake, Friday the 13th. I love horror movies, I love slashers, I love Jason, although when it comes to horror movie villains, I prefer Michael Myers over Jason Voorhees, and I prefer Freddy Krueger over Michael Myers. Ow, 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 ow. Why is the inside sharp? To me, Freddy Krueger is the king of the horror movie villains because he actually talks and interacts with his victims, whereas Jason and Leatherface and Michael Myers all just walk around silently. Friday the 13th was actually the inspiration for this whole project. In the beginning, I was releasing one piece of artwork every Friday, starting with Friday the 13th, I think September of 2019, and even committed to a custom tie for Jason Voorhees. Although if you watch the original Friday the 13th expecting to see Jason with the hockey mask, you're gonna be disappointed. Here's Popeye with the Spinach. I've never actually seen this film, but now I feel like I should. Robin Williams, Robert Altman, Shelley Duvall. Turns out 1980 is really the year of Shelley Duvall, with both Olive from Popeye and then being tormented endlessly by Stanley Kubrick on The Shining. And then we have the Blues Brothers. We're on a mission from Gad. Again, one I kind of lost track of amidst the sea of SNL alum movies. I really like it as a movie, although I haven't seen it since I was a kid. It's a great introduction to Chicago and the area and that lifestyle and the accent. And then also a good introduction to a whole group of songs from the previous era that I hadn't been exposed to before that point. I should say for the record that I just find movies I like and then I watch those over and over and over again. If I'm gonna watch something with Carrie Fisher, it will be Star Wars or Jay and Silent Bob. If I'm gonna enjoy something from Dan Aykroyd, it'll be The Great Outdoors or Ghostbusters or, vodka. That's for sure. If I'm gonna enjoy something from John Belushi and John Landis, it's going to be Animal House. Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Hell no! Germans? Forget it, he's rolling. So that was all of the movies that I could fit on the poster. I quickly ran out of space and had to leave a number of famous titles on the cutting room floor. Here they are. Those titles would be Heaven's Gate, Cruising, Cannibal Holocaust, The Elephant Man, The Blue Lagoon, The Gods Must Be Crazy, Cannonball Run, Smokey and the Bandit 2, and the Academy Award winner that year, Ordinary People. A boomerang. So without further ado, now on to Elliot's Pick. So my favorite movie from 1980, probably no surprise, it's The Empire Strikes Back. I got a bad feeling about this. So it might be hard for kids nowadays to appreciate, but there was a time way back when, in a galaxy far, far away, when everyone loved Star Wars. Looking back, it's easy to lump the original trilogy together as one unit, but so much of what I love about Star Wars came from Empire. Yoda, Lando, Vader as Luke's father, and to me, most importantly, the Imperial March. John Williams is, of course, the greatest composer of all time. Yes, I've heard Mozart. Yes, I've heard Bach. Yes, I've heard Beethoven. John Williams beats them all, and The Empire Strikes Back is perhaps his best work. Another reason why Empire Strikes Back is so great is it's basically the perfect special effects movie. So the 90s were about the eventual takeover of CGI. Nowadays, everything is done on computers, so there's no more excitement or wonder about what you see on screen, because you no longer theorize about, wow, how did they do that? How did they pull it off? How did they capture that in the camera? They probably didn't. They probably filmed it on a green screen and then paid thousands of people to sit at a computer like this one and make it look pretty. But back in 1980, Industrial Light and Magic had to use every trick in the book to tell this story. So there's stop motion animation, puppets, matte paintings, camera tricks, forced perspective, rotoscope, I mean, you name it. Basically every special effect that was ever used in cinema is on display in The Empire Strikes Back, and even a bunch of new techniques that Lucas and his team had to develop for this project. But at the core of all of it is a really great story. Most sequels struggle with what to do with the characters after the initial hero's journey, but Empire figured out it's best to make the second chapter in your trilogy like the second act of a typical story, meaning the heroes get the shit kicked out of them. It's the sequel which all other sequels are measured against. Now, my theory on why The Empire Strikes Back is so great is because the first Star Wars, A New Hope, was very much an underdog story. Everyone expected it to fail. Nobody really knew who George Lucas was at the time, and he had somehow cobbled together this group of artists to try and bring his vision to life. So when the movie came out in '77 and it was this huge worldwide hit, I think Lucas maybe got a little false bravado, got a little extra spring in his step, and rushed right in, headfirst, Leroy Jenkins style, into the Star Wars holiday special. If you haven't seen that, turn off this video and go watch it now. The whole thing is on YouTube. It is quite an experience. Many say it's the worst thing that has ever been filmed, but I disagree because it's one of the best theater experiences you'll ever have. It's got an animated short with Boba Fett. It's got a four-armed cook named Gormanda, and B. Arthur pouring beer into the top of some guy's head. George Lucas was humiliated and I'm sure wanted to go hide under a rock and never produce anything ever again. But luckily for us, he got up, dusted himself off, and fine-tuned his skills and moved forward with a sequel to A New Hope to really prove everyone wrong and to show the world that he could still tell a great story. So a similar thing happened with Quentin Tarantino with Death Proof, where many of his fans and critics and the general population had kind of dismissed his movie and said it wasn't as good as the rest of his work and had questioned whether or not maybe his career was coming to an end. And he went back to the drawing board and came back with Inglorious Bastards, one of the best movies of all time. So this is a similar pattern we see in Hollywood where artists have perceived failures and they come back to prove to the world that they can still kick ass. So for the custom tie, I had two ideas from Empire Strikes Back. The first was the creature flying up out of the space rock trying to swallow the Millennium Falcon, but I was afraid that was too complicated of a design to fit onto one of these ties. So I went with my backup idea, that is Luke Skywalker hanging upside down in the Wampa Cave on Hoth, trying to use the Force to retrieve his lightsaber from the snow beneath him. That's all for Back to the 80s. I'm your host, Elliot Diviney. Thanks for watching. If you subscribed by accident, you can actually just click the button again to unsubscribe. I don't want to tell you what to do, I just want to make sure you know your options. Join us on the next episode when Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell go to a cabin in the woods. We finally meet the adult version of Jason Voorhees. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas get interested in archaeology. And David Cronenberg makes people's heads explode. Bye-bye.